Hello, friends. From the outside, the decision to return. Henker's son looked like the softening of a mother weighed down by guilt. It appeared to be the result of a conscience finally speaking, but the truth was far more complex, darker, and far more dangerous. This was not a simple act of mercy. It was a calculated move, one carefully orchestrated by Mucer, as part of a much larger game. She had used emotions like weapons, treated love as a weakness, and built her strategy around targeting a mother's heart, because she knew better than anyone that nothing in this world meant more to Henker than her son. That love was both her greatest strength and her deepest vulnerability. And someone like Mucer never ignored a weakness. She exploited it. That was why she surprised everyone with an unexpected softness and handed the child back to Henker. Yet the true intention behind that gesture ran deeper than anyone could perceive. That day, an eerie silence ruled the mansion. It was as if the walls, the doors, and the long corridors could sense the footsteps of an approaching storm. Even time seemed to pause, watching the moment unfold. Henker sat holding her son tightly. Tears still glistened on her face, but within those tears, a fragile light shimmered. It was the kind of emotion only a mother feels when she finds the child she thought she had lost forever. She held his tiny hands in hers, trying to convince herself this was not a dream. Her heart whispered that maybe, just maybe, everything would finally be all right. But fate had not yet made its harshest move. Suddenly, the grand doors of the mansion burst open. The sound echoed like thunder, announcing the arrival of a storm. Sinem entered with hurried, determined steps. Anger was written plainly across his face. A fire burned in his eyes, and beneath it, a storm of inner conflict raged. He walked straight toward Henker. The room froze. All eyes turned to them as Sinem spoke, his voice carrying command, pain, and wounded pride all at once. "I'm not leaving my son here." His words shattered the silence. They echoed through the room like a blow. Henker froze for a moment. Shock, hurt, and disbelief flickered across her face. But then she gathered herself. She was no longer the old Henker. She tightened her grip around her son. Strength she couldn't explain filled her arms. Sinem stepped forward, reaching for the child. But Henker stood firm. "This is my son," she said quietly, yet unshakably. There was a mother's power in her voice, and unbreakable force no threat could destroy. Sinem's anger deepened. Frustration and helplessness flashed across his face. He seemed to be fighting not only her but himself. He tried again, this time more forcefully. Henker resisted with everything she had. Her arms trembled, but her grip did not loosen. Everyone in the room stood frozen. No one dared to intervene. This was no argument, it was a battle. On one side, a mother's love. On the other, pride, anger, and painful misunderstandings. In the corner, Mucer watched silently. A faint smile curved her lips. It was not the peace of a mother. It was the satisfaction of a plan unfolding perfectly. Exactly what she wanted had happened. Henker and Sinem now stood against each other. This confrontation was the most crucial step of her game. Tears filled Henker's eyes again, but this time they were not from helplessness. They burned with anger. Something inside her was breaking, yet at the same time growing stronger. She began to understand this was no coincidence. It was a game and she was a pawn. But she no longer wanted to be a pawn. Sinem, too, was at war within himself. His heart and mind clashed violently. On one side were his mother's words. On the other, the undeniable pain in Henker's eyes. He hesitated. Memories flashed before him, moments when Henker had stood by him. The purity of her love. But pride weighed heavier. He lunged forward again. "I won't give him to you," Henker cried. Her voice shook the entire room. At that exact moment, the child began to cry. The innocent sobs thickened the air. The sound pierced both of their hearts. Sinem's hands loosened for a brief second. Regret flickered in his eyes, but he quickly hardened himself again. Henker pulled the child to her chest, trying to calm him. In that moment, she was only a mother standing tall against the world. Mucer remained calm. Not even the slightest hint of regret crossed her face. Instead, satisfaction deepened in her eyes. Her plan was progressing flawlessly. Henker now understood everything. She turned her gaze toward Mucer. There was no fear in that look, only anger and defiance. Silently, she made a promise. No matter what happened, she would never give her son to anyone. Sinem stepped back. His face was filled with tangled emotions: anger, confusion, and defeat. He looked at Hanker and his son one last time, then turned and walked away. But this was not the walk of victory. It was the sign of an inner loss. Heavy silence filled the room. Hanker collapsed to the floor, clutching her son tightly as she cried. Yet within those tears lived determination. This moment marked a new beginning for her, and Mucer knew there was no turning back now. She had lit a fire without realizing that one day that same fire would burn her too. After Sinem left, the atmosphere in the mansion grew even heavier. It was as if the walls were absorbing the violence of the storm that had just passed. Silence spread through every room, but it was not peaceful. It carried fear, suspicion, and the footsteps of approaching danger. Hanker remained seated on the floor, holding her son close. Her hands trembled slightly, yet her grip never loosened. It was as if she needed to prove to herself again and again that no one would separate her from her child. Tears filled her eyes, but behind them a new emotion emerged: anger, determination, and a desire for revenge. She wiped her tears slowly, looked at her son, and made a silent vow. She would trust no one anymore. Not Sinem, not his words, not even Mucer's smallest gesture, because she now understood only the strong survive in this game. The weak always lose. Elsewhere in the mansion, Mucer stood alone. That mysterious smile still lingered, but now a faint unease hid behind it. She realized Hanker was no longer the same. The fire in her eyes could one day turn against her. Still, she reassured herself, she would keep control of this game at any cost. She had spent her life fighting to maintain control, and she would not lose it now. Outside, Sinem stood before the mansion. His steps had stopped on their own. He took a deep breath, but the storm inside him did not calm. Hanker's cries, the child's sobs, and Mucer's silent smile echoed in his mind. He pressed his hands to his head as if trying to escape his thoughts, but there was no escape from truth. For the first time, he asked himself, was I really right? Or have I been living inside a lie all these years? His heart urged him to return to Hanker, to his son, but pride and upbringing held him back. He took a step forward, then retreated. Two paths collided inside him. Back inside, Hanker slowly regained composure. She laid her son on the bed and gently stroked his hair. A new seriousness filled her eyes. She had learned too much in a single moment. She knew she could no longer act with emotion alone. Someone like Mucer could not be defeated with love. She would have to play the same game on her own terms. Just then, the door opened quietly. Gulsum entered, worry written on her face. "Are you okay?" she asked softly. Hanker looked at her, weighing whether she could trust her. Then she answered calmly but firmly, "I have to be." The hardness in her voice was new. Gulsum noticed immediately. Everything had changed. Mucer sensed the shift as well. She hurried to her room, closed the door, and stood before the mirror. She searched her reflection as if looking for fear. Then her eyes hardened. "This game isn't over," she whispered. A new plan began forming in her mind, one that would pull both Hanker and Sinem back under her control. Sinem walked toward his car. Before opening the door, he looked back at the mansion. Regret now joined the anger in his eyes. He felt he might have been wrong, yet he didn't know what to do. For a moment, he nearly turned back. Then he forced himself away, got into the car, and drove off. Inside, Hanker remained alone. Her thoughts tangled, but instead of fear, she chose to seek answers. She knew this was a plan, Mucer's plan. But why? How? She would find out. Because this was no longer just about her son. It was about her identity, her dignity, and her survival. She stood before the mirror. Tears still lingered, but behind them shone an iron will. "I won't be afraid anymore," she said. In that moment, Hanker changed. She was no longer just a woman in pain, she was a warrior ready to fight back. Mucer began activating her secret connections, choosing someone inside the mansion who appeared loyal but was secretly weak. That weakness would become her weapon. Meanwhile, Gulsum sensed something was wrong. There was a hidden darkness, a secret waiting to surface. She wanted to warn Hanker but was not yet certain. Driving, Cian reflected on the past. He remembered how Hanker had once been the most beautiful part of his life. Now she stood against him. Pain gripped him. Suddenly, he stopped the car and struck the steering wheel. For a moment, he came close to accepting the truth. Perhaps the mistake was his. But acceptance was not easy. Night slowly fell over the mansion, yet no one slept. Everyone fought their own battle. Hanker kept watch beside her son. Mucer planned her next move. Cian stood at a crossroads that would change his life. And at that moment, the story entered a new phase. This was no longer only a tale of emotions. It had become a story of decisions, truths, and sacrifices.